Hi, everyone. Tanya Hertz here, and I just wanted to talk to you a little bit tonight about the job characteristics model. So let's go ahead and get started right away. And I will share my screen with you. And the job characteristics model is based on the theory that jobs are more intrinsically enjoyable, satisfying. They cause greater employee happiness. They're more pleasurable when they're more challenging and more fulfilling, right? Uh, that is opposite to the way that work was thought of when we first began work in this country and it was first being studied. And the original theories around work had to do with efficiency and particularly it was the industrial design approach to jobs where jobs were designed in such a way that they were all about efficiency and no thought was paid to whether or not there was fulfillment, whether or not the jobs caused happiness or were challenging. In fact, they would try to make them as least challenging as possible, breaking jobs down into the simplest parts, which we find makes jobs extremely unmeaningful. But we do find that work is more satisfying when it provides these three critical psychological states for humans, and that's a meaningfulness of work. So we like when jobs are meaningful, and by meaningful we mean meaning in others' lives. When we do have responsibility ourselves for the outcome of the work. So when it's dependent upon us whether or not we are successful, the job tends to be more intrinsically enjoyable. And then finally, when we know what the results of our work was, there's nothing worse than going through and working for months on a project and not even knowing in the end whether or not the project was well received or whatever happened with it, right? So moving on, the five characteristics that we look at in order to gauge whether or not a job is intrinsically satisfying are built around the V.I.S.A.F model, or the five core job characteristics model: variety, identity, significance, autonomy, and feedback. And so it's V.I.S.A.F. And when you look at each of the different components, you can tell for the most part whether or not an employee is likely to be satisfied at that job, just based on whether that particular job scores high or low in each of the different components. So variety is how much the job requires that the employee know different things and do different things on a daily basis. Jobs are more satisfying when there are more skills involved. When there is identity to the job, so the employee gets to see that there's an identifiable piece of work and they can see the results. When the job is significant in others' lives, not just our own lives, right? Every job is significant to us because it pays us, but like I said, significance to others. When we have autonomy, so we can do what we want when we want, and we aren't being micromanaged. People do not like being told the minutia of what to do, although they do like lots of guidance and feedback. And I'm starting to realize the more I work, and then with different generational cohorts, people like different things. And it seems like this new generation does like a lot more guidance than some of the previous generations. And then by feedback, we don't necessarily mean feedback from the management. What we're talking about here is not feedback from any person, but more feedback from the job. So by that, I mean, the job tells you you did a good job or not. So like, for example, a sales job is like this. You know that you were effective because you made the sale. Or a job like a firefighter, you know you were effective because you can see you put the fire out. Or a surgeon, you didn't kill your patient, right? Those are jobs with high feedback. Yeah. So there's this book that is a really excellent book. It's called work, and they talk work, why we do what we do. People talk about why they do what they do all day long, or something like this. It's a really good book. It's basically a book where it's filled with interviews of people, and they share stories about how they feel about their jobs. And I took a couple excerpts from it I thought were interesting. The first was from a spot welder, right? So this is a spot welder. It's a guy, and he's talking about his job, standing and welding. And the spot welder just welds, doesn't move. The assembly line goes by, right? So, okay. So this is him. He's reading. I stand in one spot about 2 or 3 feet in an area all night long. And the only time that a person stops is when the line stops. We do about 32 jobs per car per unit, 48 units an hour, 8 hours a day. 32 times 48 times 8. You figure it out. That's how many times I push that button. It don't stop. It just goes and goes and goes. I bet there's men who've lived and died out there, never seen the end of that line. And they never will, because it's endless. It's like the serpent. It's all body, no tail. It can do things to you. Huh, it sounds like this guy's ready to crack, right? I mean, like, seriously, I'm a little worried about this person after reading that, right? That's a little scary there. So, but you can see, ooh, this job, ooh, does this have a high level of identity, variety? No. Again and again, pushing that same button over and over and over again, and never really even knowing what it is that he's working on. All right, the next job is for a firefighter. And this is a guy who's talking about, he's a brush firefighter. So last month there was a second alarm. I was off duty and I ran over there. I'm a bystander. I see these firemen on the roof, firefighters on the roof, with smoke pouring out all around them and the flames, and they go in. And you can see the pride at what they were seeing. Well, I took out the curse words, but the effing world's on fire. It's so effed up. The country's effed up. But the firemen, you can actually see them produce. You see them put out a fire. You see them come out with babies in their hands. You see them give mouth to mouth when a guy's dying. You can't get around that. That's real. And to me, that's what I want to be. You can tell this guy is just, that's meaning, right? The significance, autonomy, feedback, right? The job is giving feedback. Right? So there's a homework assignment where we ask you to calculate your satisfaction potential score. That's a score that's associated with the job characteristics model. I've used this lots in anytime I realize that the employees are not as motivated or happy as they should be. We take a look at the job and we see what we can do to it. So you can go through and calculate the SPS for the following 4 positions and see what you get, right? So, and we can just kind of talk about it right now, but a 3rd grade public school teacher, a stand-up comedian, one of those, I don't know if you remember Y2K, but in Y2K, they had these computer programmers whose job it was to replace all the lines of code that were a 2-digit year with a 4-digit year. And they were doing that for months and years beforehand, right? Just replacing code. And then you can look at the SPS for the satisfaction potential for the president of the United States. And which job do you think would have the highest? And why? Why that V.I.S.A.F would make them have higher or low scores? And for your homework, you're going to be calculating this just for your particular jobs, the jobs that you have. And I'm interested to see whether or not you have a high or a low SPS. But it's really interesting when you calculate these. Very oftentimes, a stand-up comedian will have a much higher score than the president, right? And you're thinking like, what the, or than a 3rd grade public school teacher, right? Or a 3rd grade public school teacher will have a higher. And so you think about why, and it has to do with things like how meaningful the job is. Or a stand-up comedian has a really high feedback score. So that doesn't necessarily mean just because this has a high score, it's the job that you want, but it just means that that job intrinsically tends to be more enjoyable, right? And here's the, here is the sheet that you use in order to calculate the different satisfaction score potentials. You can also, I made myself a little Excel sheet to do the same thing, but if not, you can just do the math. It's really simple. basically, it's so you can see the first two are V, the second two are I, S, A, and F. And these are questions about each of these. And they ask you on a scale of 1 to 7 whether whether it is very accurate or very inaccurate, the statement. And the only thing about this particular Likert scale is there is one item that you have to bold. So number 2, the job is quite simple and repetitive. That's a bolded item. And so, like we said in the other questions, whenever there's a bolded item, reverse the scale. So instead of very inaccurate being 1, it would be 7, and then vice versa with very accurate. Okay, so then you do all of these. You add, but I mean, you calculate your scores, but don't add them all together. Instead, use this quick formula. You add up the first V, I, and S, and then divide them by 6, and multiply that by the average of A, and you multiply that by the average of F, and then multiply this times this equals your SPS. And then based on that SPS, it can tell you whether or not that's a high, medium, or low enjoyability score. All right. All right, so we're going to come back and finish our moods and emotions after this, and we'll see you very soon.